Sylvie Albert from the University of Winnipeg. I'm here again with my friend Al McLeod, who is an expert on innovation, and we are going to continue to present some models or levers that organizations can use to better implement their system of innovation. So welcome again, Al.
Hi.
And we are going to look at the first four of the wheel that we presented in our last video. So in this particular presentation, we want to talk about structure issues and governance of innovation systems, things like forming teams and staffing our innovation projects, and we're going to talk about culture and change. It's a big issue when we want to do something different. We always have to think in terms of whether or not we're going to get a response that we want. And the fourth piece, which is very important to anything that we do, is communication. So let's get going on these four levers and talk about them in a little bit more detail. And the first one is structure and governance. So basically, when we talk about innovation, more than likely we're going to be looking at a series of projects that are short run in nature. Otherwise, I mean, things have a hard time getting done if they're stretched out too long. People lose a little bit of their pep, if you wish. And also, you know, in this environment that we live in, we can't afford to be taking too long in pondering on projects. Your competition will get it done, or you'll just miss the mark completely. So one of the things that we want to do is establish governance and leadership teams that have some power to get things done and understanding of you know, who is going to be making some decisions and all those kinds of things. So I like your concept that you have a sponsor with a team. That team is quite a diversified team, so that we don't have that groupthink. But in that team, there's an innovation expert and a technical expert that may be doing some project management. So maybe you want to describe a little bit what that looks like and what you would expect from these different types of people on that structure.
Yeah. So the first, to me, rule of thumb is that if the business unit that you're innovating within isn't at the table, it will never be implemented.
Right.
So the first rule is to make sure that you have a sponsor within the business unit who is high enough in the business unit, hopefully the budget owner, that can make the decisions for the project. And the goal is to meet with them on a regular basis. Often they'll put together a little steering team from within their business unit to help them. But they are the overall business sponsor, not the innovation leader.
Right.
And then you have a innovation coach who is somebody from within the practice who has experience in all the things you need. They know how to run agile projects. They know how to be a great facilitator. They know all the methods, and they can train. So they're there as the innovation coach, we call them. Then you have somebody, again, from the business unit who's going to be what we call the project manager. So they're going to be responsible to the steering, to the sponsor, as is the innovation coach, and that's your leadership team, those three people. And the person that is the business unit person, who is the project manager, is responsible for making sure that the project gets done and gets delivered back to their project, not the innovation team. The innovation team is responsible for making sure that the processes and methods within the innovation team lead to a good result. Doesn't mean an innovation could be a killed project, but it means as efficiently as possible getting through the project.
Right. So a lot of those innovation happens within months, not years, right?
Oh, for sure. The objective is certainly to, as quickly as possible, know if something's a good idea or a bad idea.
Right.
Because if it's a bad idea, you either need to change it or you need to move on to something else and not spend a couple years working on something that isn't going to ever go.
So in terms of structure, we often see, you know, what we call the appended innovation structure. So basically, let's say an R&D department or just an independent innovation unit.
Right.
And that has its challenges, right? Because can you explain what those are?
Yeah, I mean, they can work. Depends on the industry, depends on the company. It can work. I personally believe that it's important to have the innovation group as a competency center for a larger company, especially as a competency center within the organization that then works with the rest of the organization to bring things forward. They're not separate. They're actually a part of the company. That their job isn't to innovate; it's to enable innovation.
Right.
And the objective over time is to have everybody in the company trained in innovation, and not just training. Training doesn't do it. Experienced in innovation, having gone through one of these projects, because it'll change. Most employees I've worked with, after they're through one of these projects, they have a different outlook, and they become an innovation champion. And that's the goal of this thing, is over time to create more and more people who a lot of times you'll hear people say, I don't innovate, I'm not innovative. You bring them in a project, and then at the end they go, I didn't realize you could do that. I didn't realize I could do that.
Right. If you want to lead towards a culture of innovation, you want to involve
Right.
as many people as you can to understand what the process looks like and why it's important and how they can contribute to it and so forth, right?
It's a great way to find future leaders too.
Right.
If you bring people on projects and you can actually gauge how engaged they are, the way they work together as a team, at the end of the project, you see the different levels of employees that come out of it. That some are ready to go back, and I've heard things like, I'm going back to my business unit and I've changed the way I'm thinking, and I'm never going to accept that just things are the way they are again. I'm going to go back and bring this back to my business unit. That's what you want to hear.
So you've been part of organizations that had sort of like that formal structure,
Right.
that, with trained experts on innovation.
Yep.
What were some of the challenges that you found now in trying to integrate with maybe a functional area that now has to take what you have as a great idea and implement it?
Yeah, since the job of the innovation team is to work with other people to develop ideas and then bring them to market and successfully implement them, there are 1,000 touch points in there. And you're not in control. If you're the innovation leader, you are not in control. You don't have all those people on your staff. You have a small team. And then so you have to work with procurement and legal and HR and the functional business units and all these different groups, IT, for example. And you are not in control. They have their regular work that they have to get done, and often that takes precedent. And over time, maybe that can change, but certainly that's one of the things. You come in and your expectations are on top of the things they already do sometimes, since innovation is often one of the last business units or the newest business units to be established. And so really understanding how do you work with all those groups, whether it be maybe a project management team or a product management team, because if there's a change made to a product, often the innovation side finishes, it still has to go to product management to do a bunch of work. Finalizing it, marketing it, all those things, all those touch points have to be worked out, and it's a very big effort actually. And every one of those can be blockers that can change a project and make it less successful.
So another way to have an innovation team is to have that distributed system. So we've seen, for example, programs that train people into being innovation engineer, black belts, for example, and they come back and maybe there's several of them across the organization, and they help their units through innovation. Any thoughts on that? Have you seen that?
Well, any model can likely work, but it depends on, first of all, as I always say, it's the leadership of the organization enables things to work or not work.
Right.
If you have a smaller company and an innovative leadership team, and you have some skilled innovation experts in there, you could probably make something work. I have no doubt about that you can make things work. But often what happens is people get trained in innovation, go back into their jobs. They can make change within their business unit. What they can't do is make change on a broader scale, because they don't have that scope, and they don't have, as soon as they try to do anything outside of their scope, they're smacked down.
Yep.
So it is harder, I think. The smaller the company, the more likely something like that would work. The larger the company, I don't know how that would work. You need some kind of structure in a larger company.
Right. So in terms of structure and governance, you need the minimum of your top leadership support.
Right.
You need a minimum of a sponsor in the area where the innovations are being developed, so that some decisions can be made and there's buy-in and again some more leadership support at that level. And you need some kind of expertise in terms of skills on how to carry out over and above this, so technical expertise and innovation expertise, because these are quite different, right? So
Right.
I remember trying to carry through some innovation, and lots of organizations have centralized structures, and you're trying to get marketing over to help you with something, or IT over, and you're not a priority because they have 100 other things that they need to get done, and then so. Sometimes what happens is that we say, well, okay, I need to have my dedicated IT person or my dedicated marketing person. And that becomes quite inefficient, right? So how do we work it so that we have a more efficient systems in terms of knowledge about innovation and carrying through from project to project, not having to reinvent the wheel every time?
Well, I think that you do need some agreements with different business units. So starting with the ones that hold you up the most, working with them, and it's different if it's a functional area than a more of a non-functional area. So if you have a functional area and you use the example of marketing or sales, you're not going to be able to hire your own salesperson. That's not going to work. So you have to figure out how to work with them, and you have to figure out how you make their, that you align in terms of what you're doing. If you're talking about the non-functional areas like IT or HR and those other ones that provide services to the company, then conceptually maybe you could hire some of your own resources, but you still have an overall organization that you have to fit into. So what you really need is you need agreements with all those different groups and how you're going to work together.
Yeah, and one of the ways to do that is to, if it's everybody's business to do innovation, they have to report on what they have done to either help another unit through their innovation process or been involved themselves in innovation. Then people have to liberate some time on their schedule and make it a priority.
Yeah, because if you think about it, your top thing on your list could be lower than the bottom thing on their list. That's the way I always think of things. I bet you the top thing on my list is lower than the lowest thing on your list, which you will never get to. So how do you actually earn the place at the table? And that can only come, again, from the top, and making sure that we're all kind of working together, and that if everybody is just going to work through their own list and at the end of the year they go, well, I don't care about anybody else, I got my list done. I don't think that's a great way to run a company, by the way.
Right. So the other piece is that, okay, so now you have a sponsor, you have to formulate teams. So lots and lots of study on how to develop high performance teams. So we're not going to go into the details of how a team functions together, but maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your experience with that.
Yeah, so my perspective on that is that really make sure that you're respecting, if you're going to pull people from other business units onto a team for innovation for a 3-month project, the biggest thing is to respect their time. Don't have them sitting in useless meetings. Don't have any overhead on them whatsoever. The job of the practice, the innovation practice, if you have one, I highly recommend having one if you're a bigger company, is to make sure that you're maximizing the time. So you have them in, maybe you don't second them fully, you bring them on for a couple hours a week. And you really have well-facilitated workshops where you get what you need out of them, and then between then, your practice works like crazy to get ready for the next workshop and move the project along. But you're not having people waiting and sitting on useless meetings or any of that, because if you do that, that to me is death.
Yeah.
That's inefficient, and the real thing is that people complain about how many meetings they have their day and they still go. My decision was often, I'm not going. I'm not going to a meeting where I find I never get any value out of it. And I think that we have to be respectful, especially if you're a competency center and you can only work by bringing people to come work with you. You have to be super careful about that.
Right. That's where your innovation leader on the team becomes really important because they know what you have to do, in what order, how
right.
quickly you can get things done, and motivate people to make decisions, fast decisions, to get through the process as quickly as possible.
And you don't need them for the innovation processes. You need them for the things that they're good at. You need them for the come up with the ideas and help with the pitches and those things. But they don't need to do the innovation process work behind the scenes. That's done by the team.
Right.
To take, because you don't want those people. That is not the deal we're trying to make. We're trying to make a deal, I think, where you're being very respectful of the team. The goal would be they don't have to backfill for that person.
Right.
Right? If you can keep the project short enough and you can keep their time involvement, respect their time involvement, the goal would be that they're actually not having, they can suck it up within their team for a short period of time.
Okay. So the next piece we want to talk about is the impact of culture.
Right.
And I mean, I always say, especially in strategy and in innovation, that you really need to study the past to understand the future.
Right.
And so in the past, how were employees treated when they came forward with ideas? Were there failures? How were those failures handled? Did we learn from them? What kind of policies and practices have either helped or hindered innovation in the past? And really taking temperature of the room to understand, what is the level of engagement? Are people excited to do new things? Are they more fearful because of past practices? Do we have, subgroups that think a certain way? Right. That could be helpful, or it could be a hindrance as well, or sort of a common culture where, we're very risk averse or something like that. So really understanding where we stand in terms of the culture. And so, McKinsey talk about, if you're going to implement some innovation, you have to practice what they call innovation parenting. So starting with the philosophy, why it's important, what you intend to do about innovation, setting that tone, talking about growth, encouraging creative people to come forward and give them some accountability for doing things. And so establishing that pattern, I think that you've talked about many times, to slowly get people on board. So I often say, anytime you want to do something new, you've got to look at the low-hanging fruit, and you've got to work with the willing. Because if you want to change a culture, this is a long-term process, it's a long-term lever, so you've got to slowly show people some successes to bring the laggards online for the long term. So maybe give your thoughts on culture and what your experience has been in changing the culture towards innovation.
Yeah, it's hard, and it starts at the top. I said it many times, but it really, because you can say you want innovation, you can say you want that, but what happens when decisions get made, and do you walk the walk? And what I think is really important is that leadership team is not just talks about it, but is engaged in it. Mm-hmm. So they spend some time every month on innovation. Right. And you maybe create a subgroup of the leadership committee that is a governance committee and meets on it more often, things like that. But the biggest thing to me is that when you're looking at trying to create an innovation team and trying to get going, is, as you said, finding some people. It could be a leadership change. You could have a new leader who wants to make change. Perfect time for innovation. You could have a customer group. That's a really good group to start with, because they're often very much under pressure by customers, or someone with a really big budget or a really big problem. And those are the people who are often the people who could be the first ones that you work with, because you need some wins and you need to make some changes and find some people who are, like you said, willing to take a chance and have the mindset that they do want to change.
Right. A big part of building your culture is trust.
Yeah.
So people have to see that you're walking the talk. So if you say that you're embracing failure, mm-hmm. That failure with learning,
Right.
that they can actually see evidence of that, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I even call it managed failure with learning.
right.
The reason I call it managed failure is, and this is, I've been guilty of this in the past, is understanding when you're doing something, what is the worst thing that could happen if it fails?
Right.
And then how do you actually manage that? Can you experiment more, test more to manage the failure? You're still going to get a failure, but you get it earlier, cheaper, faster. So that's why I call it managed failure with learning.
So another piece that really important in innovation is the concept of managing change.
Right.
Because innovation brings about change.
That's all it
and
does.
That's all. That's what it's responsible for.
Exactly.
So how do you plan, to have these brilliant ideas, but you can't get them across, or that won't get anywhere just because of the culture, or
Right.
because of other problems that are happening in the organization.
Yeah, I mean, you can only plan so much and then things happen. And innovation does need other groups to be successful because the innovation group doesn't innovate, it enables innovation. So the most important thing, though, is to have the person responsible for implementing the change on the team, asking for the change.
Right.
Because that's the first trick. If not the one asking for the change, it'll never get implemented because it'll never be the right time to do it. You won't have the money, you won't have the people. So that's the key thing, is to have engaged business sponsorship at the business unit level all the way through the project to make sure that it gets done. That's the key thing for me. And if you don't have that, I wouldn't actually, I would turn down those projects and say, if people say, I want to do this innovation, I'd say, great, send people. We don't have people. Right? Bring your people. We don't have the expertise. You're going to be involved as a sponsor. Here's what that is. We promise to respect your time, and here's what the amount of time it'll take. And then that helps a lot. When you've got single innovations that affect multiple departments, which is often the case, or business unit, you have a bit more work there because then you're working with multiple departments and coordinating the change.
I think that's a good list there that we have on the board in terms of, how is change supported? Well, when we
Right.
plan the change, when we assign people to think about the
Yep.
future
Yep.
and explain the impacts and then why we need the change, when we work to convince people and to share in that vision, when we involve people in brainstorming and figuring out the solution and how to better implement
Right.
the solution to work within what they feel are acceptable levels of change, and how we reward people, we follow through. You talk about the importance of monitoring and reporting regularly on what we're doing on innovation. That's very, very important. Otherwise, we're just talking about it and people don't really see that something is occurring. So how are we encouraging them to change if we don't have that strong follow-up system? And when failure becomes an acceptable risk, when we provide a playbook for innovation, and part of that could be some innovation leaders that can guide others through the processes, how we train people so that they feel comfortable in the new environment, and we provide the technologies to help them coordinate. So I think that's a great list for people to think about in their implementation on how they're going to do all of those things.
Yeah. It's also important that when you talked about assign people to think about the future, I think that you want to think about the future as it pertains to your industry, and also across not just technology, but also what are startups doing? What are your competitors doing? And really kind of trying to be watching for those potential inflection points that could be coming. And most companies don't do that very well that I've seen. But I like doing startup scouting, understand what the startups are doing in your industry, doing technology scouting so you understand what's affecting your industry now, what may be coming in a few years, and then having a strong innovation ecosystem, a network of partners that you can work with as well is really key to also having your ear to the wind and hearing what's going on.
Yeah, and there's so many things that could be on the agenda, in terms of the aftermath of the pandemic, and how that's going to affect business going forward. individual, each industry is affected in different ways in that perspective. The impact of data, the ethics of data,
Right.
all of this technology that's coming our way, globalization and its changes, and supply chain. And there are so many areas to consider that could lead to all kinds of new innovation and change that organizations have to think about.
Yeah.
So the last one on the wheel for today is communication, and definitely we communicate. I think lots of people in any industry will tell you that failure to communicate leads to complete failure.
Yep.
People want to know that what's coming, how they're going to be impacted, what their role is in change and innovation and so forth. So a few things that were listed here by Forbes, communicate or get left behind, is define the innovation. So what do you mean by it? What's important? Provide clarity on who is responsible. Describe how innovation will be generated. So the whole structure and governance piece here, teams. Communicate about innovation. So it comes back to monitoring and reinstigating the idea that there's an organizational commitment to innovation. Lots of examples of what is being done. Be precise and in what you communicate, and transparent, and provide some tools for people to communicate about innovation with each other. Right. So these are examples of some important constant listening that is talking about innovation that I think they're all important points.
Yeah, innovation is a lot about people. It's about people, and it's about change. So I really believe in whoever's running or leading the innovation function needs to really communicate both the successes and failures and numbers and all those things of innovation, but the human side I think is really important. I found that there's often, when you're doing innovation, there's so many human connections you can make, which is the opposite of what we usually do in business. We don't talk about humans, we talk about numbers. And in innovation, I always thought there's a great chance to talk about the connections that we're making to people on projects, not just customers, but employees. I think employees are so key to this whole thing, and getting it from their mouth, their experience on the project. And then reporting that back to everybody is very, very important, and talking about the individual successes of employees who have been changed by the process. Yes. And that to me was one of the most important things. And the impacts, past just the numbers, cultural impacts and impacts on customers of the change that are made. So trying to communicate that, I think, is really important. Both using like an internal social media platform or newsletters, whatever the ways that you would communicate to staff. But make it interesting, making it exciting, and making it, like I said, human as well as kind of the data side.
Yeah, and I love the idea that it gets people excited about a better future. Yeah. Because often people are not very happy with the status quo. Yep. And the idea that things could be better and change is really it promotes engagement and may help organizations retain people.
There's also more and more students, I know because I work with them, are coming out of post-secondary education with entrepreneurship training and going into corporations. Their expectations will be substantially different from when some of us graduated from college and went to school. Completely different. So to think that you're just going to have some of those people come into your company and then just kind of sit there 9 to 5 going to meetings and kind of, it's not going to happen. No. So if you want to attract the best people, you've got to provide the best environment. It's as simple as that. And a best environment is one where it's open to change, people are respected, things are transparent, there's trust, all those kind of things. And that, you enable that a lot through communications as well.
I was watching a Simon Sinek video recently that talked about upcoming generations. And you know, if they don't hear and see what they want, they just leave. They don't even tell you why. They just leave. And so, you know, we have to make sure that we're creating these environments for communication and for ensuring that they have a voice in a way to make an organization better.
Yeah, it's an attractant for good people to your organization.
Right.
Or it can be the opposite.
Exactly. So give us the concluding remarks.
Well, sorry. First of all, you want to make sure that you identify leaders that can be tasked and provide them with authority and decision speed they need, and support. You must give them support. And if you need to use external people to help, that's very important to get them going, because you don't want to take forever to get going. From a support perspective, support your teams by providing clear roles and getting rid of those friction points and impediments. And the way to do that is to have the teams work together and figure out how they can best meet each other's needs.
And able to make some decisions.
Right, right. And a lot of that is about, like I say, establishing guardrails. I talked about that all the time in running innovation teams, like establishing guardrails. Okay, so legal, here's how we're going to work together. Can we come up with a standard template for this so that these $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 projects that we can just do them quickly without a month lead time?
Right.
Like, it's that kind of thing. You know, create an innovation and change culture by modeling behavior. And I think it's really, really very difficult to change a culture, but you have to start somewhere. You know, so if you set out to change it, figure out how you can change it, and that goes back a bit to where we said, find people who are more willing, and if you can get some things going with them, they communicate that success. You create maybe a flywheel effect, and get people say, hey, why can't we be more like that? That's the way I've tried to do it. And then develop a communication strategy that's open, clear, and motivates people to change and engage. Now, I don't know about you, but I haven't seen a lot of stuff come out of communications in corporations that motivated me to engage. Excuse me. So that is what you're trying for. And that's why I said, if you try to connect from a human perspective, innovation is something that you can do that with, right? So if you're making a change as a financial services company to something that's related to customers, and you can show how that changed the customer's life for the better, why wouldn't you put that in your reporting, right?
Yeah.
And those are the kind of connections. Or if someone in the company is super proud because they're part of this team that's changed customers' lives, that's in your reporting, along with all the other stuff you'd expect.
Right. Excellent. Thank you so much, Al. And we will come back in our next video to talk about the other 4 levers that are on our wheel. And another great day in discussing implementation of innovation. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.